Hey, I'm Dietec, and for my next case mod project, I'm going to be working on the InWin 509 PC case. There was this fella who lived a couple of states over here in New England, and he ended up emailing me and asking if I could modify his computer. I accepted, and he ended up driving like 4 hours to drop off all of his hardware and his computer to me. And so now I get to play with all of his really expensive stuff, and hopefully when he gets it back, it will look a little bit cooler than when he dropped it off. There wasn't too many constraints on what he wanted me to do with the case other than just he wanted it to be blue and white for the color scheme, and he wanted to be able to fit a 360 radiator. This whole thing's going to be custom water cooled with hard tubing and everything. He wants to be able to fit a 360 radiator up onto the top panel, which, if you're familiar with this case at all, isn't typically possible. So I'm going to have to do some pretty significant modding to the case in order to accommodate that request, and so this should be pretty fun. So this case was actually a little bit more difficult than I had originally anticipated to take apart. I think it's because that divider there that goes kind of vertically up the front area of the case and then makes that like attic type area with the hard drive cages and everything, I don't think that was ever meant to come out. And the hard drive cages up there, you actually had to drill out a bunch of rivets to get the hard drive cages and the optical drive tray out of the case. And there was actually a lot more rivets than I've ever had to drill out of any other case. It's just because that divider was held in there by rivets and no other case has a divider, so obviously there needs to be more rivets in this case. But I was trying to only drill out the rivets that I had to in order to get that top panel off to take out the divider thing, and it just was a little bit confusing onto which ones were necessary and which ones I could leave. Ended up doing pretty much all of them. But it was obvious to me that that divider had to come out because there was no way I was going to be able to fit a 360 rad plus fans up in that top panel with that divider there. I ended up trying to save that horizontal piece and just cut it in half and route it in the opposite direction where the optical drive tray used to be. I just like the way it looks and I wanted to keep it. And I actually put a decent amount of work into attempting to do that, but I eventually realized that it just still was going to get in the way of the 360 rad and everything that I wanted to put on the top panel. I just wanted to include that section of the time-lapse where I attempted to do this thing and it didn't end up working out, because that just happens all the time. If you're PC modding and you don't have a clear, concise plan, like you didn't do like CAD drawings and stuff like that beforehand, you're not really gonna know exactly what's gonna work out until you actually see it in front of you, and it's part of the process.
When you think you've given all you could, they want some more. Constantly combating conversations with connoisseurs. Cognac on deck, I'm on the night shift like the Commodore. 64 system outdated, so give this tone applause. Them man are dinosaurs, they ain't dictating my future. I love the game, but everybody be rapping like Future. Medusa mind state, I turn you to stone when I shoot a verse that will make you disperse. It's true that turned into the truth a long time ago. They don't wanna respect it, don't want to acknowledge the power shift. Ego, they protect it, but I will flow like electric. I'm gonna set this off, no apology. I move metric, them man still moving imperial. My tech, cause I'm moving hectic. Now Underrated artists living off the hype. They got no longevity in the game, they got no stripes. No longer social in person, they live on social media. So social skills are not work.
So this case has this weird little divider here, and I wanted to keep it just because it's part of like the original aesthetic of how the case was supposed to look, but we couldn't keep it the way that it was just because when it was running across this side of the case instead of where I routed it instead, it kind of got in the way of where we wanted to put our 360 radiator on the top panel. It just wouldn't fit both of those things in there at the same time. So to keep that aesthetic and also have it be functional with a radiator in the top panel, I had to take it down a little bit and just shorten the divider up a little bit and then route it to the opposite side of the case. I feel like it kind of keeps true to how InWin envisioned the aesthetic of the case to be. It's a little bit different and it allows us to fit a radiator. I have this radiator here. It's not an EK rad, but it's about the same size, like height-wise, and with a fan on it, it should tell us exactly what we're going to be looking at when we have the radiator installed. So as you can see, having it on the top panel, it does have some room for clearance. And since we use this angle bar instead of the vertical part of the divider, there is plenty of room in here behind this part to fit any kind of like water cooling tubes or anything that we want to put back there. So I don't have all of the hardware that I'm going to need to finish modifying the actual case. Like before I start drilling any holes in the top panel, for example, I want to have that 360 rad and those fans in my hands just to kind of make sure nothing interferes with anything else. But I have decided that I'm going to paint the motherboard tray and the power supply shroud that I haven't created yet, and basically all the other stuff on the inside of the case is going to be white, all the hardware. And so I wanted to modify the Zenith Extreme motherboard and the 64 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM that I have to kind of match that aesthetic. So this is the process that I go through in order to achieve those mods. It's actually super easy to paint your RAM, pretty much no matter what RAM you have. And actually a lot of people ask me if it's dangerous to paint your motherboard and your RAM and the rest of your components, and generally the answer is no. As long as you're using non-conductive paint and you're just being really careful not to harm anything, not to paint over anything that's supposed to come in contact with heat sinks, like for example your CPU. It's generally not harmful to put a thin layer of non-conductive paint over anything. In fact, you could paint your graphics card PCB if you wanted to. And the thermal differences are pretty much negligible as well. You don't really have to worry about anything overheating just because you painted it. That is, unless you do a super thick layer of paint. I know a lot of people plasti dip their stuff. I use paint because paint is a lot thinner and allows for heat to kind of like dissipate a little bit better than plasti dip does. But yeah, painting your motherboard is pretty time consuming just because you have to tape off all of those connections, make sure you don't get any paint inside of your RAM slots, for example, or like your PCI Express slots. And you also don't want to put any paint onto chips that come in contact with your heat sinks with like thermal pads on them and stuff. You just don't want to impede any of the heat dissipation off of those components at all. But once you tape everything up and then spray paint it and then take all of your tape off, there will be some areas on the motherboard that don't look completely perfect, like some corners and stuff that were just covered over by tape previously that couldn't get sprayed on. So in order to touch everything up and get those corners painted and all that kind of stuff, I just take the spray paint and I spray some of it into the cap of the spray paint and take a paintbrush and put it in that little puddle that you made inside of your cap. And then just kind of like paintbrush over whatever you need to touch up. And as you can see, the results are pretty nice looking. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out.
We are come for you. Hey, run boy. We Watch it! No, that's right! Drop it! That's right. You hear me? Tell them, madman.
So this was the first of a few progress videos that I'm going to be doing on this project. I'm obviously not finished with it yet, and I do have a couple of the parts on the way right now, so it shouldn't be too long before I have another video out. If you like this kind of thing and you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe. If you want to see more progress pictures and updates and stuff between videos, I have a whole bunch of links in the description to social media stuff. And I'm just really excited about how this thing is turning out so far, so I'm gonna go work on it, and I will see you in the next one.